Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever wondered how someone entirely reconstructs their worldview after a massive, life-altering personal crisis? Or honestly, how any of us are supposed to separate actual truth from the absolutely overwhelming noise of modern politics, social media, and endless legal battles? Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a fascinating, highly structured look into a deeply personal, fiercely argued, and yes, highly politically charged manifesto. We are going to impartially deconstruct an intricate worldview, one that attempts to merge ancient scripture, modern politics, and intense local legal battles into one cohesive philosophy. It's a really compelling study in how personal experience can just entirely reshape how a person reads history and current events. So, our source material today is a foundational publication called Thoughts in Isolation by an author named Denzel Kenobi. And what makes this text so striking is its core premise. Kenobi approaches every single issue through a very specific lens, operating on the strict belief that biblical wisdom completely overrules worldly wisdom. For him, this isn't just some casual philosophy you think about, once a week. No, it's an active, daily discipline. He views life, politics, and the law entirely through this ancient framework, actively retraining his perception to reject what he calls the lens of the age. Just imagine waking up every single day and consciously questioning every headline you read, every legal norm you accept, and every cultural assumption you encounter. That is the baseline for the worldview we're exploring today. Now, to make sense of all these complex ideas, we've broken the author's worldview down into 6 distinct themes. We'll be looking at the furnace of adversity, the accuser's playbook, ancient tactics in modern politics, questioning institutional scripture, the case for conditional love, and finally, building the wall. Let's start right at the beginning with Part 1, The Furnace of Adversity, which serves as the real catalyst for this manifesto. 7. That is the exact number of years the author spent totally embroiled in a grueling local litigation battle in Gainesville, Florida. He describes these 7 years not just as a lawsuit, but as an entire season of life, a literal furnace. Just think about the psychological toll of that. That's over 2,500 days locked in a defensive posture. And while the historical record actually shows he was successful in proving that local institutions did wrong, well, that success came at a massive personal cost. According to Kenobi, holding his own community accountable meant that career doors just slammed shut. Have you ever done the right thing, only to find yourself completely isolated by your own community? It was this intense period of isolation and closed doors that served as his ultimate catalyst. Instead of begging for a seat at a table that he felt was corrupt, he decided to write. This brings us to Section 2, the accuser's playbook, and the machinery of pre-disposition. To really fully grasp his framework, you have to understand what he calls predisposition. Kenobi argues that when a person or an institution wants to take you down, they honestly don't care about facts. They care about emotion. The accuser's goal is to make a scene and get the audience to invest their feelings deeply and early. Why does this matter so much? Well, think about a jury in a high-profile trial. If an accuser can convince the public to feel absolute blind outrage on day 1, the factual truth that finally emerges on day 10 simply cannot dislodge it. Admitting they were wrong would cost the audience their emotional investment. It requires them to admit they were fooled, which people hate doing. So the tactic is to make that initial feeling load-bearing, where the emotion itself supports the entire weight of the accusation. And this brilliantly illustrates how Kenobi deconstructs a 24th-century-old text from the book of Nehemiah chapter 6. He breaks it down into 4 calculated movements used by accusers. First up is shame. This is a highly visible public attack designed to force the target to spend all their energy just defending themselves, rather than building or progressing. Second is insult. This is mockery designed to soften up the audience and dehumanize the target before the main accusation even lands. Third is guilt. This is the actual engineering of a trap, so that even totally innocent conduct looks like evidence of wrongdoing. And finally, the need to be right. This is the accuser's own stubborn emotional investment, where they just double down. They literally cannot stop their attacks without admitting the whole thing was a fabrication to begin with. Moving on to Section 3, Ancient Tactics, Modern Politics, or basically the same play run today. Kenobi neutrally argues that this machinery of destruction hasn't changed in thousands of years. He draws a direct, documented parallel between the tactics used against Nehemiah in the ancient world and the tactics used in our modern political landscape. Where the ancient text says a rumor is reported among the heathen, Kenobi points out that today's equivalent is the classic anonymous media phrase, sources say. It's a convenient way to bypass any logical defense and strike at a reputation instantly. Where Nehemiah was invited to a supposedly neutral meeting in Ono, Kenobi sees today's invitations to legal or administrative processes that are actually designed as total ambushes. Now, he applies this directly to his own local battles in Gainesville, but he also explicitly points out that this exact playbook was run on a national scale against Donald Trump. Regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, his overarching point here is that these ancient tactics are absolutely still being used to manipulate public perception today. Let's move to Section 4 and see how this builds. Questioning institutional scripture. What is trusted and what is weighed? Here, Kenobi aims a pretty heavy dose of historical skepticism at institutionalized religion by pointing out a fundamental, irreconcilable tension at its heart. He points to the Greek word katholikos, which simply means universal. For Kenobi, the entire institutional program of the Western Church for the last 2 millennia has been built on this concept of universality, the idea that all are welcome. But why would an institution prefer a universal approach? Well, for scale, for reach, and ultimately for control. The problem, as he sees it, is that early scripture doesn't actually describe a universal religion at all. It describes an exclusive, conditional covenant. To take an exclusive covenant and make it universal just to build a global institution, he argues the stewards had to strip away the original conditions. Kenobi backs up this skepticism with very specific, documented historical grievances. He argues that the New Testament text didn't just fall out of the sky. It was stewarded by an institution acting with its own doctrinal interests and power preservation goals. He points out that canon lists were debated by imperial councils, that the Latin Church chained the Bible to pulpits and resisted translating it for centuries, and he highlights known manuscript discrepancies like the Johannine comma. But the most striking piece of evidence he brings forward is for sure the 1807 Slave Bible. Institutional stewards literally cut entire sections out of the text, most notably the book of Exodus, before handing it to enslaved people. Why? Because you obviously cannot maintain institutional control over enslaved people if they are reading stories of God liberating slaves. It perfectly illustrates his point that human institutions will gladly alter the text to protect their own power. But Kenobi also displays some serious intellectual honesty in his historical analysis. In this text, he actually formally retracts a claim he previously made regarding the popular myth that the European image of Jesus was modeled after Cesare Borgia. After deeply researching it, he admits the primary documentation simply isn't there to prove it. However, he definitely doesn't abandon his core point. He pivots to state that regardless of Borgia, European Christendom spent centuries manufacturing religious images in its own cultural likeness. A Scandinavian Christ for Scandinavia, a German Christ for Germany. Think about the psychological impact of this, painting the conqueror's face and handing it to the conquerors. For Kenobi, forcing a culture to worship an image that looks exactly like their oppressors isn't just a historical tragedy. It is a direct historical violation of the ancient commandment against making graven images found in Deuteronomy. This leads us into Section 5, the case for conditional love, or what he calls the hardest sentence. The quote here states, "Yahweh does not love everyone, only those who keep his word." Now that is incredibly jarring to the modern ear, isn't it? Our ears have been trained by centuries of the universal religious program we just discussed. But Kenobi does not soften this stance at all. He asserts that biblical love is not some warm blanket emotion given freely to everyone without expectation. Instead, it is fierce, it is fiercely protective, and above all, it is strictly covenantal. He anchors this highly controversial view directly in the text. He points to Psalm 5:5, which speaks of a hatred for workers of iniquity. He cites John 14:21, where love is explicitly conditioned on keeping commandments. And he references Deuteronomy 7:9, grounding the very concept of a chosen people in a conditional framework. To Kenobi, a religion that sells admission to everyone simply cannot afford entrance requirements. Therefore, teaching unconditional love isn't generous, it's simply flattery. Think of it like a legal agreement in your everyday life. In law, a contract requires mutual obligations, right? If you sign a contract where one side gets everything and owes absolutely nothing in return, well, that isn't a binding agreement, it's a scam. To Kenobi, a covenant with the conditions stripped out is exactly that, a voided contract that ultimately leads to ruin. And finally, we arrive at Section 6, Building the Wall, the countermeasure to the playbook. So, the crucial point is this. When faced with the accuser's playbook, whether that's in a local workplace dispute or on the grand national political stage, Kenobi says the absolute only valid countermeasure is the one Nehemiah used. You refuse the trap meeting, you answer the lie clearly in one single sentence, you ask for your hands to be strengthened, and you simply keep building your wall. It leaves us with a really powerful question to ponder as we consume media and watch modern events unfold. Are we allowing manufactured emotion and predisposition to dictate our truth? Or are we willing to endure the furnace, critically weigh the narratives we are handed, and build a solid framework of truth for ourselves? It's a heavy thought to leave you with, and one that certainly invites a deeper look into how we form our own worldviews. Thanks so much for joining us for this deconstruction on The Explainer. Until next time, keep questioning and keep learning.